It's episode 3 of this whole new series that we are doing on YouTube, Math Discussion Makeover on Math Chat Podcast. So far, we've talked about how 2 other small moves, like not bringing materials to the carpet and not repeating what students say, can quietly kill engagement during math discussions. And now we're going to get to something even deeper, okay? Because if students are listening and if they are engaged, there's still one thing that can completely shut down their thinking, and it's the questions that we ask. So let me ask you this. Have you ever asked a question that you thought was open-ended, but every answer that kids gave sounded exactly the same? Or worse, you're like standing there waiting for an answer. You know, standing there waiting. That was an intentional wait. Because it's uncomfortable, right? So you're waiting there and you're waiting to hear the answer that you already have in your head. You know what I'm talking about, right? You're hoping they will say something and nobody seems to be saying it. Here's the shift. That's not an open-ended question. That's a closed question in disguise, okay? And just like we've been talking about in this series, when you ask those sneaky open-ended questions that aren't actually open-ended, they're closed in disguise, you're accidentally killing the engagement during the most important part of the lesson, even though you thought you were keeping them engaged. Okay. This time though, it's not the materials, it's not the repeating, it's honestly just the way we ask the questions. Because the moment that students feel like you're looking for a specific answer, it almost becomes like, guess what's in Miss Eel's head, right? Guess what's in the teacher's head? They stop thinking and then they just start guessing to see if they can get what you want to hear. Let me share with you a very common example. A teacher might say something like, okay, so what's the same about the way that these two strategies, what's the same about these 2 strategies? What's the same about how they added, right? Sounds open. But if you already know what you're looking for, then students can start to feel that. And what happens is they start scanning, they start trying to find that right thing instead of actually sharing their thinking, instead of pushing themselves to look at the strategies and think deeply. The goal of questioning is not to get students to say the right thing. Here it is. The goal of questioning is to reveal what students are thinking. It's to reveal what students are thinking. What do they know? You are trying to figure out what they know and don't know. And then use that thinking that they share to share it with the others. But if your question already has a destination, then your students are going to stop sharing their thinking and they're just going to try to guess what you want. So let me show you what this looks like in real life. So before you ask a question, you call on students, right? And then you kind of guide them, you kind of steer them. Your follow-up questions are steering them toward what you want. And then finally, someone says what you were hoping for. Okay? Now, after the shift, here we go. You say, what do you notice, right? An open-ended question. What's the same? What's different? And then you pause. You might give them 10 seconds to think. You might ask them to turn and talk. You might even prompt them to say, like, think of as many ideas as you can. Then you turn and talk. So you ask the open-ended question, you give them some time to think, just 10 seconds. Now you ask students to turn and talk. Now that they've got their ideas, they have something to share. Now they've talked to their partner, now they have their partner's ideas. And now you open it up. Now you say, what's the same? What's different? What do you notice? How did they add? And this is where the magic begins. This is what I call a brain dump. It's where we get as many voices as we can to share something. Now, the kicker, they have to be listening because we don't want a bunch of repeating, okay? An occasional repeat here or there, but we don't want students saying the same thing over and over and over again. You know what I mean? We're not interrupting them. We're not steering the conversation. We're listening, because your job in that moment is not to guide them to an answer. Your job is to uncover what they understand and what they don't understand. While they're talking and sharing their thinking, you're listening for what they say. You're listening for what they're not saying. So maybe they're talking about the color marker that you wrote the strategies in. Maybe kids keep repeating that they added. Yeah, they added. I noticed they added 84 first. I noticed that they started with 84. Okay, we know you know that. But what are they not saying? They're not talking about how the student used a number line to go from 84 to 90, to go to that friendly number at first, found that compatible number, 4 and 6 are compatible, to get us to 90. Nobody said that. And that was something I was hoping they were going to talk about. You see what I'm saying? I'm listening, you're listening, when kids are talking, for what they're saying and what they're not saying. Because somewhere in that conversation, a student is going to say something. A little glimpse, maybe, not a fully formed thought, maybe an eloquent thought. But it's going to be aligned to what you were hoping to work toward. That is your moment. Okay? But you don't jump in. You definitely don't repeat it. You don't fully take over. But you might say something like, hold on to that. Evelyn, we're coming back to you. Hold on to that. And then later, after the brain dump's over, you bring it back. Let's go back to what Evelyn said. And you explore it. And you build from it. Evelyn said that strategy 1 went from 84 to 90. Evelyn, can you say more about that? And then we might do, what did Evelyn say? Right? That's a tip from our last episode, where we're not going to repeat what Evelyn said for the class. We're going to have somebody else in the room repeat it. This shift is shifting from controlling the discussion yourself to using the discussion to study students' thinking. It helps you know your students better. When I got nationally board certified, one of the things that changed the way I thought about my classroom was that the most important thing in national board certification is that you demonstrate that you have knowledge of your students. This, my friends, is how you have knowledge of your students. You cannot do anything else in teaching until you know your students well. Because if we want our students to think deeply, we have to ask questions that don't have one destination, right? We have to ask questions that let our students show us what they know. So now you've got students listening because they don't have a bunch of stuff in their hands. You're not repeating what they all say, so they're only listening to you. You're asking these open-ended questions and getting kids to talk to each other. But there's the next challenge. What do you do in the moment? What do you do when students don't know what to say? What do you do when the room gets quiet or the thinking isn't there? That's where the next move comes in. In the 4th and final episode of this little mini series, I'm going to show you one simple strategy. You know I like to keep it simple. How it can completely unlock student thinking and reset your entire discussion when it stagnates. Come back here next Monday and go ahead and hit subscribe if you're listening on YouTube. And if you haven't listened on YouTube, what are you waiting for? I put makeup on for this. All right, I'll see you next Monday, friends. Talk soon.